So this is our March 2022 member program. Pleased to see quite a few people here compared to the last couple of events we did. So great, and we've got a few online. And for some reason, I can't get this to advance. There we go. Just a short agenda tonight, because the most of it will be our guest speaker. We've got a very brief local chapter update, which primarily work that Kristen has been doing. And then we'll have our guest speaker, which she's the president of the Lake Michigan region. And I won't say too much. I'll let Joan introduce her. We'll kind of keep that surprise until she's back in the room. And now just moving on for our local league update. New this year for us, well, not new, but expanded this year for us is Vote 411. So we're on Vote 411 this year, and we're doing some advertising with the newspaper, right, Kristen? And we did submit questionnaires to 49 candidates. There are a number running for county supervisor. There's 4 running for school board. And then I think there's a total of 8 that are running, is it 8 or 10, running for city alderman here in Sheboygan. So we focused on the city this year and then the county supervisor races. And hopefully we can expand that. But we are trying to get the word out and get some momentum going on that. I actually had a little slide on that, which isn't showing up for the folks here, but that's okay. The other thing we have for local updates is I want to mention that there's a call for officers and directors if anyone wants to volunteer for a position. We do have a nominating committee, and we've been making progress contacting members who could serve in different leadership roles. But if anybody wants to just come forward on their own and has not yet been contacted, please feel free. We also have openings for a chair for the Environment Committee, and there's always room for people to help with voter access. Then the last thing here for local business is just our treasurer's report. And Cheryl Andrus is the treasurer. If anyone has questions, please see her. But the gist of it is we have a balance of $7,000. So we're doing well. That's enough to pay for our dues, which dues to the state and the federal chapters, or the state and the U.S. chapters, but we've also been doing things like our Vote 411 campaign that we invested some money in. So that brings us up to the main event, which is Joy from the League of Women Voters Lake Michigan Region.
Hi everyone in Zoom land. Welcome. We didn't mean to exclude you.
Is that better for Zoom?
They're not, we can't hear them, but let's see. Yes, much better. That's what we're doing. Okay. And the only thing I'd ask Jane is if we could move this so I can see the slides a little more. Just move this window. Super. That's great.
Okay. How many are here?
How many do we have on Zoom today?
I think there's 6 or 7.
Great. Okay. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the organization today and what our structure is, and sort of entice you to get involved. And then I'm going to talk about some of the things we've been doing recently in helping the lake. And so I'm going to move forward. So the title is Lake Michigan Region of the League of Women Voters, who we are and what we do. So many of you veterans are familiar with interleague organizations, but for those who might be attending from the public or are new to the organization, an interleague organization is made up of different leagues that gather together, usually determined by geography. This is determined by geography, but it has an added component of being related to Lake Michigan. So our membership consists of the 4 states that surround Lake Michigan. So Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan. And then we have approximately right now 52 local league chapters in those states. Now, our goal is to have even more, and that's what we work at doing, because any league that exists in those 4 states can join the Lake Michigan Region League as well for what I consider to be a nominal cost. And it's determined on how many members you have. And then that means that you individually are now members of that interleague organization. So our mission, as I mentioned before, is to educate and advocate for the conservation, protection, and enhancement of Lake Michigan and its watershed, as well as the Great Lakes Basin. So we do quite a bit of work for the Great Lakes at large. We promote political responsibility through informed and active participation of citizens in government, and we act on selected governmental issues affecting the Lake Michigan watershed. So you all know governance, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that, but someone who worked with me thought it would be good for you all to know how we're structured. And so in addition to our officers, we have 4 representatives from each state. And so each state sends 4 representatives as board members, and that's determined by the state. And in addition to the officers, that comprises the board. So it's a pretty sizable board of directors. And we have committees that focus on education, advocacy, governance, communications, fundraising, bylaws, and nominating. And the member leagues are also entitled to appoint a liaison to our board, and they are welcome to attend our quarterly meetings. In fact, you're welcome to attend whether you're a liaison or not. The member league delegates, which is the person that your league determined should go vote at our annual meeting, they get 1 vote on behalf of your organization. But since you have some members that are also board members, you have members from your organization, so you have a few more votes coming from your organization, and that's because you're so involved and have such great, terrific volunteers. And we rotate through the 4 states for our membership. And so this year, actually, it's Wisconsin's turn to host the annual meeting and our educational conference. And since most of the Wisconsin people are from Sheboygan, I have a sneaking suspicion that it's going to be very close to you all. So we're really looking forward to that. And that's in the late fall. For education, we have a speakers bureau. So we have any number of programs that we can offer you, and people can come like I am doing today, or they can come via Zoom, and we can talk to you about a variety of things that impact Lake Michigan. So we can talk about, invasive species. We can talk, if you want to talk about something that individuals can do in their community or in their backyards. We've got a program on rain gardens. We have programs on the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which I'm going to talk about a little later. All sorts of programs, and we really have a lot of expertise on our board. People who have been doing this for a long time, and so you'll really get a quality presentation if you want to take advantage of it, and there's no charge for that. And we have an annual seminar. We used to just have 1 annual seminar, which was a 2-day conference of several speakers with our annual meeting. But now, in addition, for the first time, we are adding a spring forum. And as a result of a survey we did, we realized that a lot of folks are concerned about climate change as it relates to Lake Michigan. So we are going to have a climate change forum in Chicago on April 16th, and you can attend in person, or you can attend via Zoom. So like our conference, it's a hybrid. And I don't know if Tom Skilling, the WGN meteorologist, is a thing here in Sheboygan. I don't know if he reaches up there, but he is beloved in Chicago and on cable stations throughout the US. So he is has been with WGN for many, many years and has really gotten excited about climate change. So he is willing to come and speak, and he has assembled a dream team of climate experts, scientists who are very distinguished. And so we'll talk about that at the end of the program to give you a little more information. There's our website, lwvlmr.org, and we have a newsletter, The Splash, and we have a watershed game and 3D watershed model, which we take throughout the region to schools or to libraries or to science fairs or to environmental expos. And we have folks who are able to present and work with the people on this watershed game. And so what it really instructs people on is how the watershed functions and how your actions impact a watershed. We have grants that we have received for stormwater education, as well as invasive species. And then we also offer scholarships. So there are scholarships available for registration fees for both the conference and the spring forum. And then we also engage in fundraising. We have an annual fundraiser that coincides with our annual meeting. So our LMR focus is on education, but it's also on advocacy. So we are both a 501c3 for our education arm, but we are also a 501c4 for advocacy, because we do vigorous advocacy for legislation that impacts Lake Michigan. Some of the things we have done for advocacy is engage in litigation relating to protecting Lake Michigan. I'll talk about this a little later, but we were involved in the litigation related to the diversion when Foxconn set up south of you. We also work vigorously supporting full funding for the Environmental Protection Agency and the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which is an initiative that was started in the Obama administration, and the person who headed it and really set it up was a fellow named Cameron Davis, who actually is on the Chicago Water Reclamation District now. And the design for it was to provide full and consistent support and funding for cleaning up and proactively protecting the Great Lakes. And you know, everybody wants clean water. They want clean water to drink. They want clean water in which to recreate. They want clean and safe water as they engage in commerce related to those activities. And so it is truly a bipartisan issue. And when there was an attempt to decrease the funding by the previous administration, the Trump administration, by 98%, that was reversed by that administration, their desire to do it, because the constituents, no matter what side of the aisle you are on, want these waters protected. So I think it's a perfect league issue to work on, because we can work on it together and we have a common interest. We provide comments on rulemaking and regulatory proceedings and comments on consent decree settlements, which you can tell a lawyer prepared this, which a consent decree is a form of a judicial order that requires cleanup, but the parties all consent to it. The government and the polluter agree to it and consent to it. And then we also provide comments on and appeals of permit decisions and work on items at the federal and state level. So just to give you an idea of how the advocacy works, LWV US approval is necessary for us to take action on federal laws and regulations and policies. So if we get it from one of our coalition partners or someone from the league says, gee, I'm really concerned about the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, and I'm worried the funding's going to get cut. And can we take a position? Can we sign a letter? We have to first take that request and we run it through the advocacy folks at the US level. So we have to go through steps. So it's not as nimble a process as one would hope, although the more we've been doing it, and I chair the LWV Climate Team Water Subgroup for the US, and as we've all throughout the country said, hey, we need this to move a little more quickly, they are moving more quickly. And so we're able to take action a little quicker than we did before. So the relevant positions, and you can see those in the where we stand and impact on issues documentation. All of our advocacy is based in the league, the LWVUS position on natural resources, resource management, environmental protection, and pollution control. Now the state leagues must approve state action. So that has to go through that layer before we can do something on our own. So the nice thing is that once the LWVUS has given approval for advocacy, anyone from the leagues, the other leagues, the local leagues, the state leagues, they can take action without having to go to LWVUS themselves. And in fact, we have worked with the state league and our representatives have helped us do this to get them to sign on to things that we're signing on. So now we have the 4 state leagues and the local leagues and the state, the ILO, LMR, working and signing on to these initiatives. So it's really exciting to see, well, exciting for someone who loves policy to see how these things work and have increased. So really quickly, our LWV, our LMR partners in advocacy are the US and of course the 4 state leagues. And then we work with a terrific organization, the Environmental Law and Policy Center based out of Chicago. Howard Lerner chairs that, and there are lots of great programs that they offer. And I encourage you to go to their website and look them up because they have many programs that they offer via Zoom. And there's a monthly one that's just about 25 minutes and you can log in for free. The Healing Our Waters Coalition is actually a partner with whom we do a lot of partnering on advocacy. They have a great policy team, great scientists. And so we do a lot of work with them. And for the Love of Water and the Oil and Water Don't Mix Coalition, we have a board member from there that's on our board. And it's a lot of what they're focused on now is this Line 5 pipeline from Enbridge, which impacts you folks in Wisconsin and impacts Michigan. And so that is some work that we've been doing. And for those who are not familiar with Line 5, it is that pipeline that comes from Canada and goes through the Straits of Mackinac, and it's really decrepit, for lack of a better word, and runs the risk with the turbulent waters of breaking and polluting the Lake Michigan. So it's of great concern. And then the Hoosier Environmental Coalition we partner with. Now I have a question mark at the end because one of the things that I'm happy to answer questions at the end of this, but I'd also like to hear from you what concerns you have. Do you have ideas for coalition partners? We're always interested in that. And if you don't want to talk at this meeting, reach out to your representatives and they can bring that back to us. I think I already described the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative to you in previous slides. We really had some wins this year, or last year really, with the bipartisan infrastructure bill. We received $1 billion under that bill. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative received that. And it has 5 foci, which is toxic substances in areas of concern. So that's, you know, environmentally sensitive areas. I mean, they have, in Illinois, Waukegan Harbor really had tremendous pollution issues that made it's as beautiful as this, but it was really not a safe place to go swim, or it wasn't really safe for drinking water in that area. Great Lakes Restoration Initiative identified it as one of its sites and got it cleaned up. And it's really remarkable how quickly that work has been accomplished. They also focus on invasive species, non-point source pollution that impacts nearshore health. So for instance, I'm about 4 miles from Lake Michigan at our lake house, but then I'm on an inland lake, just a few miles from there. And when we get these severe climate events, we're on the lake, but right in back of us is an orchard and a farmer's field, and he's a wonderful neighbor. The fact is, though, that when we have a severe climate event, you get overflow of the pesticides that are used on the farm. If the ground is so saturated, you have a problem with that. And so that's an example of a non-point source of pollution, as opposed to, you know, an industrial facility that's sending stuff out, polluted industrial contaminants. They also deal with preserving and restoring habitat and species, and then establish foundations for future restoration actions. So it is really good work and a government program that's doing something to really help the lives of people, both their economy, their recreation, and their health. And so I think it's a terrific initiative, and I think a lot of people do too, because it has bipartisan support consistently over the years. But you're always working to make sure it's fully funded. I have in front of you a map that you can access at www.glri.us. You can go to that part of Wisconsin and click on any of those dots, and it is going to populate with the site that has been restored or is being worked on under the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. So I highly suggest going to this site, glri.us, and working with that interactive map, because it really shows what's going on throughout the region in the Great Lakes. And you can learn a lot about what's happening in that. Now I've got this toolbar here that's getting in the way of me advancing the slide. Maybe I can do it that way. No, I'm gonna have to call on Jane to, our Zoom toolbar came up and is blocking my ability to, I tried doing it with the cursors, but, oh, there you go. Okay, so I think I've covered most of this. We've joined with numerous organizations to lobby for full funding of the GLRI, and joined in numerous letters to the Great Lakes States congressional delegations in support of the US EPA and GLR funding. And we really started our advocacy to have it culminate in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. We started our advocacy way back in the beginning of 2021. So you start with letters to subcommittees, then the committees, and you go through the entire legislative process, just making sure that those sources of funding stay in place. And so it's a systematic process, and we began with that. I mentioned what happened with the previous administration, and that is because everybody loves water and wants safe and clean water. So it's one of our signature advocacy achievements, and it continues to have broad public support. we also engage in federal rulemaking. So I think what you can take from this without getting too much in the weeds on this is that in the previous administration, there were some rulemakings that limited the scope of what could be defined as a water of the US. And so things like marshlands and wetlands that were typically protected from with pollution regulations were taken off the list, taken off the definition, and they were no longer protected. We, of course, engaged in vigorous advocacy, but to no avail at that point. There was also a narrowing of the scope of the National Environmental Policy Act for evaluating environmental assessment and environmental impact statements in the process for it. So what qualified as something that would warrant a study or an assessment or a statement that said, this is a bad source of pollution and we've got to do something about it, that definition was narrowed as well. And then of particular concern, and it was something we advocated against, there was a movement to eliminate all studies that linked negative health effects with sources of pollution, unless the folks who engaged in the study disclosed without any limitations the personal information of the subjects of the study. So unless these scientists were willing to disclose that information, they couldn't use it to link the negative health impacts to the source of pollution. Not a good thing. No one wants to give up their personal medical information in order to be safe. And so those who wanted to have disclosure of the subjects of those stories, of those studies, called this initiative the Transparency in Science Initiative. And those of us who really thought this was a bad idea, we referred to it as censoring science. And so the league took a position on that. And of course, all of this was run through the US before we said anything. We're not out there on our own doing all of that. And so US Department of Transportation, Waters of the US, same thing, different department, different way of administering it. The Army Corps of Engineers deals with the EPA standards, and Department of Education deals with items relating to transportation. This is some of our recent litigation. So we did work and appeal the WDRNR grant of a permit to withdraw and divert Lake Michigan waters outside the Great Lakes Basin for industrial purposes. This initiative was in contravention of the Great Lakes Compact. Unfortunately, we and our litigation partners being coalition partners, lost the appeal when the administrative law judge ruled on narrow state grounds that this was permissible. So I don't think I have to go into a lot of detail about diversion, because I think in Wisconsin, there has been this struggle and tension about diverting water from Lake Michigan. You know, these are great, these are freshwater oceans. I saw an article in a publication that talked about climate refugees from California coming to the Great Lakes states because they don't have to worry about water. And then we worked with an ArcelorMittal consent decree in joining in comments objecting to the terms of that consent decree between ArcelorMittal steel mill in northern Indiana and the US EPA and Department of Natural Resources for illegal discharges of chromium into Lake Michigan, because those impacted and resulted in a significant fish kill. So there really hasn't been major environmental legislation, but for the funding of GLRI during the past two administrations. Action has been done via treaty and rulemakings and executive actions. And in many ways, the pendulum is swinging wildly between regulation and deregulation. So while it's less permanent than legislation, regulatory and executive action can still be sticky and have some longevity, especially when combined with litigation and political activities. For instance, the Paris Climate Accord. And just so you know, in the current administration, of course, was opposed to the rulemakings and executive actions related to the environment, and is working to reverse those. But there is a process that's involved. But right now, the current administration has put a hold on any enforcement. Excuse me. And I just started before I switched the slides, but so basically they've been reversed by this administration, but there's a pause on the implementation of the current rulemakings and executive action pending it going through the processes. So we're involved now in processes to comment on the new rulemakings to reverse all those decisions. I think one of the things that is positive from our perspective in LMR is that the infrastructure bill is going to include many climate mitigation and resiliency projects. So a lot of it is focused on addressing the things that have happened as a result of climate events that have been pretty disastrous. And I think one of the things we can be proud of at the League is for the moratoria in this bill on utilities shutoffs and funding for public water supplies and treatment to get the lead out of the infrastructure that's causing negative health impacts, particularly on children and pregnant women. So this is my last slide, but I also want to talk about, and I don't have a slide on this, on the other areas that we work on. I think I've talked about invasive species. I've talked about stormwater and issues and advocating for, right now, one of the things we're doing is really advocating for use of these funds to develop stormwater management systems that are appropriate for the 20th century. 21st century. And so we really need to modernize how we're dealing with our stormwater. And one of the reasons that's important is that when we have infrastructure that's not up to date, this stormwater, particularly in an area like this, causes runoff, and it impacts things like coal ash ponds, which the coal ash pond from the power plants then gets into the lake. You have overflows in industrial sites that gets into the lake, and a variety of things in a suburb where you have infrastructure that's pretty decrepit and not modernized, runoff getting into estuaries and to different smaller bodies of water that ultimately flow into the lake. So all very important initiatives. And I'm not sure of the data in Wisconsin, but in Illinois, we get almost 100% of our drinking water from either Lake Michigan or the Mississippi River. So it's really important to manage the pollution sources in those areas. So of course, what we're doing is balancing And what the government's doing is balancing energy, the economy, and the environment. And these are all realities. We're seeing now, with a war going on, the impact that energy deficiencies can cause. And so they're all inextricably intertwined and they're complex. And our greatest societal challenge now is to decouple carbon pollution generation from our economic activity so we can move on and exist into the future as a result of these, in spite of, I should say, these violent and erratic climate events that are related directly to the amount of carbon emissions we have. And so that's how we are now integrating our protection of the lake writ large with this new challenge, not that new challenge, but a challenge that most of the population is now realizing this is something that's really impacting us. And so we are working to integrate our advocacy for the lake with advocacy for climate change and preventing climate change. So the next thing I want to show you, and I'm going to ask Jane to step up and then I'll take questions. Is just a little of the detail on our speakers for this climate change forum that is coming up on April 16th. And we hope you can attend online or in person. We are going to have people wearing masks there and ask that people who choose to come be vaccinated. But we do offer this online version for those who can't get there or don't feel comfortable attending. But it would be on Michigan Avenue and the parking is Grant Park parking, so it's not too expensive. Relatively not too expensive. I think it's like about $11, which is in Chicago a good deal. So I'm going to have, it's not up there for some reason.
It's not? Oh.
Do we need to stop the share and then?
Oh, okay. Well, let me try it again.
Need to close out the presentation or?
I can do that. Good idea. Is here, right?
So while Jane is doing that.
Did that work? No. Not quite, right?
Oh,
Okay.
there's Tom Skilling, a friendly guy. I don't know if you have ever seen Tom Skilling. How many people have seen Tom Skilling? Okay, 3 of you. So he is so energetic, and he's like, well, I'll tell you, Gina, it's just really terrible out there. And but he explains the science behind it. And you're like, this guy is really, engaging and pleasant. And you meet him for the first time in person, he's the same way in person. So the person that's on the camera who's ebullient and really enthusiastic, he's like that all the time in person, and he's just delightful. But I'm going to move this up a little. It's our kickoff to Earth Day 2022, and Tom has a real passion for advocating for issues and impacts related to climate change. And he is trained and has studied meteorology, but he realizes that you need more than someone who shares the weather report if you're going to change minds about the changing climate. So he is going to bring, and we've had him before in other venues, he is going to bring along a great, we call it the dream team. Seth Darling is the interim chief scientist and technology officer for energy and global security at Argonne National Laboratory. He's been with Argonne for 20 years. He's had many, many jobs there. His focus now is on climate related to water. So perfect fit for us. And I think he's going to have a lot of great things to tell us about. And he is also a fellow at the University of Chicago. And then we have Mary Gady, who is an attorney with Gady Environmental Group. group. And she's a former regional administrator for U.S. Environmental Protection Agency Region 5. And she was appointed in the Bush administration, but resigned because she was asked to give Dow Chemical a pass for polluting they were doing. And so she's a Republican, she's appointed by a Republican, but she said, no, I'm not doing that. She has an interesting perspective. And then Don Wubbels is a professor at University of Illinois. He's a professor of atmospheric science and a presidential fellow. And he's got a resume the length of your arm. And, you know, I'm a lawyer. Why use 10 words when 100 will do? But people with better minds than I in terms of marketing say, you can't have all those words. So I'm telling you the credentials, which is he is not only a university professor, but he was on the climate team for the Obama administration. And he is on a very prestigious panel, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they do climate assessments every year. And he was the co-lead author on those assessments that ultimately resulted in the IPCC being awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. So people have great knowledge. I hope you'll join us, and I'm going to open it up to questions now. And I'm sorry to go away from the podium. I was overly enthusiastic. Yes.
I have a question. Do you ever since this is sort of related to the water in the state?
Yeah, well, the ozone levels, you know, we've done a lot to, not our fleet, but a lot's been done to decrease ozone levels, as I'm sure you know, but that has, you know, impacts directly the heating of the climate. And that's how the emissions trap the climate. And you've also, with an ozone layer, you've got the direct access and lack of filtering of the sun's rays. So we're not real focused on that specifically, but we are working on environmental issues generally and paying particular attention to the issues I talked about today. Yes, Rebecca. It is not, it's opening. Yes. If you scroll down, I thank you for bringing that up, because it will registration is going to open on March 19th. So you'll be able to go on there. And I would really encourage you all, if you would like to be on our mailing list, then you won't get a lot of spam from us. We're so busy that you're not going to get a lot of spam, but you will get a notification of this. And if you want to give me your email, come up after this, or you can give it to one of your representatives here, and they can get it to us as well. And it'll be on the website, and the links to register will be open on the 19th. Yes.
I have wondered about that $1 billion, how that's going to get distributed equitably, or I mean, is there going to be some corruption going on?
I think, well, first of all, how is it going to be distributed is a great question. I'm sorry, Geraldine said, how are they going to distribute that $1 billion? And there will be revolving accounts, and the distribution does have a focus in part on environmental justice. So making sure that the people who need it are getting it, because quite frankly, there is a link between where polluting sources are situated and lack of economic resources in the community. So there is a particular focus on that. And that is something that we are working with Healing Our Waters on. So that's a great point. I don't think from what I know of it, I don't think there's a concern with corruption as much as just making sure it gets distributed. And, you know, one of the problems is right now in 2022, we're trying to, you know, we're still operating on a 2021 budget in the US because they keep doing these stopgap budgets, and then you're frozen in amber in time. And so it's really just getting what was passed by Congress through this appropriations process. So that's, in my view, more of a significant problem than corruption itself.
I just need to brush on that, the state legislature right now is really pulling out with our federal money.
That's another great point. Geraldine was talking about the state legislature and what they're doing to distribute or not distribute these funds that were appropriated and passed by Congress. I participated in co-authoring with our committee, the LWV West Climate Team Water Committee, the blog that'll be coming up in the LWV US newsletter that you all get, or you should get. And one of the things we talk about, we provide questions that you can ask your legislator, your state legislators and your local legislators. Hey, how are you planning? What are you planning to do with the money that's been appropriated for GLRI or for stormwater management or for getting lead out of the pipes, out of the service lines? You know, well, basically replacing the service lines, but you really want to probe them on how they plan to spend that money at the local level. That's a great point, Geraldine. And that's something you can do at your local level, absolutely. Any other questions?
I think we'll be able to hear folks online too. If
anybody
online wants to try to unmute.
Oh, great. Do we have any questions from people in the Zoom room? I may look in the chat because I see 4 questions there. Oh, Ellen says, Tom Skilling was at a station in Milwaukee before leaving for Illinois. Yes, he was. And you'll hear me read that in his intro. Thanks for bringing that up, Ellen. And then Liz Braden said, oh, thank you. She said she's got to go, but it was a great presentation. Do we have any other questions?
Can you hear me? I have a question.
No, I don't think so. I don't hear anyone. So I want to honor our time here, and we're getting close to 6:30. We have a couple more minutes for questions, but if not, thank you so much for your attention and for spending this evening with us. Thank you. And the other thing I want to say in these last 2 minutes is, what is on your minds in terms of what's happening in Wisconsin and with regard to the lake or the environment writ large? Is there anything you'd like to share that you think we should pay attention to at the regional level, Geraldine?
Well, our Attorney General, Josh Paul, he just filed a lawsuit against April for the and they're discovering it in Milwaukee too now, in Lake Michigan, because they had some firefighting demonstrations or something down there.
Yeah.
We'll see where that goes, but these companies are just unregulating, and they're not reporting anything.
Well, you know, PFAS we didn't talk about that today. That is a real groundwater issue and other bodies of water. But we have a Speakers Bureau program that we can do virtually or in person on PFAS specifically, and the whole program's based on that. And of course, the fire retardants, you said there were demonstrations using fire retardant, and that has been a source of PFAS contamination. they don't use that PFAS in it anymore, but the fire departments have such a storage of it. And of course, PFAS is, once it's in there, it's really hard to get rid of. And so you have to be more intentional about how you're going to deal with it. So great point. Rebecca? The power pump,
So, yeah, we need to find out more about what information that has.
yes, and decommissioning it,
Yeah.
commissioning it. That's a good point. Good thing to pay attention to. Rebecca had talked about the power point in Sheboygan closing down. And so when, okay. Anyone else? Okay, well, thanks again and have a safe travel home. Bye-bye.